I'll sort of try and catch up to what we did last time and what it is that we're trying to do. And for some of you, based upon my experience with you, this is probably old hat, especially Dennis, who I've read your books and I know how much you're into modeling already anyway. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Share screen. This is a model in Kumu, which was put together with the intent of identifying some topics that people were interested in investigating deeper, to actually develop models for, to understand them better. Now, I once wrote a paper called Modeling is an Unnatural Act, because I think for a lot of people it is. And it's interesting that if you try to get someone to do something that they're convinced they don't know how to do, they will come up with every reason imaginable for not doing it, and therefore actually short-circuiting their own learning. Because, you know, from my perspective, the best way to learn things is doing them, and along the way sometimes you make a lot of mistakes, but I sort of adopt the Nike perspective, which is just do it. And if I'm not making mistakes, I figure I'm not learning anything. So the intent here is to sort of edge some people who have mentioned that they were interested in doing modeling into doing modeling in the softest way possible. So we developed, or I developed, this Kumu model, which is just topics that people have identified to this point. And at this point, this particular issue discussion, which I just posted in the chat, and it would be good if each of you actually clicked on this and follow this discussion. The intent is to do all of the communication through this model, as opposed to flooding people's inbox with various and sundry things that they're not interested in. So if one is, all right, if you don't, get back here, if you don't have a Kumu ID as of yet, you can go here, which I'll post also. You can go here and get one. And then you can tell me what your Kumu ID is, and I will add you to the list of members who are members of this project. By being a member of the project, every new discussion that gets created, you'll receive a copy of in your mailbox, and you can choose to respond to it or follow it based upon your level of interest. And if you follow this particular topic, then anytime that something gets posted to this topic, you'll get a copy of it. At the moment, nobody is following this particular topic, but there are a couple of people following this one. Questions so far? I hadn't intended to do a catch-up, though, based upon some people who are here that weren't here before. I figured I needed to do that in terms of the things. In other words, here's the video from the first session that we had 2 weeks ago, and here is a video about how discussions work in Kumu, and here is okay. Once upon a time, Kumu was a relatively simple product, easy to use. And then the developers added 1,000 features and the users asked for 1,000 more. And now it's gotten to a point where it is unbelievably deep. And people go there to create a model and get lost in all of the shiny bells and whistles, so that they're playing with the things that aren't really relevant at the moment, as opposed to developing a model. And I actually got tired of all of the time I had to spend doing the setup to create a model in Kumu to look the way I wanted to. So after several years of being stupid, I realized that Kumu has this amazing feature that allows you to fork or clone any model that you can see to make a version of it that belongs to you. So I created this Kumu template, which has all of the settings that I use for the models that I create, so that it defines what the colors are, what the styles are. It has a legend that talks about all the pieces, so that if I am going to create a new model, all I have to do is go over here and tell it, come on, tell it that I want to fork this project, which I guess is the programmer term for clone. Though when I do that, then I have to delete all of this stuff in here. So I created a blank version of this, which has nothing in it except all of the setup. And both of those are accessible here on this list of related relevant items. And there are a bunch of short 5 or 6 minute videos that talk about the evolution of this template and all of the various and sundry features, which has evolved over several years. Questions so far? Are you asking why you're here? Wow, what a group.
What is your experience, Gene, to make it really collaborative and to work in a collective manner, you know, okay, along these years?
Sorry, so I hate, no, I can't show you that. So, all right. A couple of years ago, there were 8 to 10 people who were interested in the idea of a rural sustainable food system and what the relationships were associated with developing and maintaining such a thing. And we met weekly over a period of 8 to 10 months, I forget how long. And during that period, we developed the model, and in the context of it, we had 136 discussions about various pieces of that model inside of the model itself, so that anyone who has a Kumu ID can actually initiate a discussion on any element in the model, whether it be an element, a connection, or a loop, and ask a question or raise a point or whatever, so that we went through adding the pieces, and during each meeting, we would ask this, where is it? Oh, I gotta find it. Hold on. The approach that we used was the simplest thing that I could come up with in terms of how to develop a model based on simply asking 2 questions. Where is it? Come on. So that when we started with the topic, and we simply asked, what influences this and what does this influence? And we just asked that over and over and over again. And each person that was a member of the group had influences that they believed were part of the model, so that they would bring it up and say that, I think this is an influence on such and such, and the group would talk about it and decide whether or not to put it in or take it out or whatever. And the model just evolved. And after a period of 8 to 10 months, the model that we developed was an absolute disaster, not something that I actually want to show to anyone, except all of the people that participated said they walked away from the effort with a far better understanding of the topic than they had when we started, and they were glad that they participated. So the intent was not actually to develop a model, but to build an understanding of the relevant relationships. And out of that, there were some models developed, which are, all right, I'll show you. Oh, I shouldn't do this. But... This is not something that you want to try and explain to anyone, though this version, which is essentially the essence of that model, is something that you can explain. And I have this model that I used for storytelling for a number of years that I thought was marvelous for doing storytelling, until I realized that by the time that I explained the 10th loop in the model, people couldn't remember what the first loop was all about. So that I would use this model and I would unfold it piece by piece by piece and explain it as I went until it got to a point where nobody understood what the hell I was talking about, probably even me. And one day I asked this unbelievable question. I said, what does this mean? Not what does it say, but what does it mean? And when I asked that question, I realized, from my perspective, this is what it means. All right, it's simply 5 loops. And in arriving at this understanding, I found out that this relationship and this relationship are not in the other model. And they're critical to understanding that the whole thing is essentially 2 shifting the burden structures. And when I present it to people piece by piece, they say, well, there's got to be more to it than that. And I say, sure, there is. So that this particular piece actually has all of these loops that are part of it, so that I can drill down on it to show the detail that's associated with this piece or this piece or this piece. So it's a messy process at best. And though who was it? Oh, I forget. This is actually unforgivable, but whoever the guy that was that invented system dynamics, whose name I can't recall, I'm getting old, said people learn best by building their own models as opposed to trying to explain other people's models to them. And so the idea is that we get together and we investigate some topic piece by piece by piece, to the extent that people are interested or not interested in. And you know, models are finished when you don't work on them anymore. So more questions, or am I just making it more confusing?
No questions, but Gene, just a question. Well, I do have a question. So, you know, you said models are finished once you've stopped working on them. But what happens for you when you go back to a model that you did a while back? Do you remember, like, does it still make sense to you after a while? Not the complex one, but the simpler one, the one that you simplified later on.
Well, sometimes they make sense, and sometimes I say to myself, what the hell were you smoking when you did this? Okay, because you know, I mean, you look at them and you say, this doesn't make any. In other words, I had this simple 5 or 6 loop model that I that I talked to people about for years. And then one day I realized that one of the relationships was wrong. And nobody ever called me on it, which was very disturbing because it was not one of these elaborate, complex models. And so it's, for me, a model is simply a basis to investigate or elaborate understanding of some topic. And I, you know, I work on them to the extent that they interest me, and then I don't work on them any longer. And then sometimes I go back and for something piques my interest or whatever, and I say, well, I think I started something about this, so I go back and look at it again. And sometimes, I mean, the hardest thing is to get to a point saying, this is POS, and just throw it away and start over again. I find it a very difficult thing to do, though every time I have thrown the model away and started over again, it has actually turned out better than it was before.
Okay, but then if I can follow on, so like that's you, that's Gene, who's different from quite a lot of people. But I see, for example, loads of people, these kind of like systems mapping, systems modeling, all these tools all over the place. People use them, like you said, to kind of make sense, but then also to create change somewhere. So, you know, so they think, okay, we have a problem. We're going to learn about this problem using these tools, and then we're going to use them to also decide where we can have leverage points, where we're going to make change. So for those people, they either need to be able to go back to those models, or they need to be able to communicate them to others who, you know, to kind of bring them in on the chain. And I think that's something where I find a bit of a problem, is that I can understand, like when I first started learning, I was always told the mapping, consider it a sense-making tool. It's just for you to develop knowledge. But then how do I take that knowledge? What's the best way for me to take that knowledge to other people so that, you know, if I want to create change somewhere? From your experience, or from maybe anybody else's experience, because I think everybody has quite a lot of experience with this. So I'm really curious what you do once you finish your sense-making. How do you convey that information in a way that you can use it to actually create change or start change?
I stopped posting my models. I typically don't share them with anyone. They are now the basis for asking better questions. So that rather than develop this model and try and convince somebody that this model makes sense, the model is like my homework, so that I find somebody that's interested in something, they already posted something, and I'll look at it and I'll think about it, and I'll use whatever I developed as a model as a basis for asking questions. Colombo is my hero. If any of you remember Colombo.
I remember Colombo. That's great. Does anyone else want to maybe chime in, or do you all do the same as Gene? You kind of use them as a way to kind of ask better questions, but you don't really use them?
I'll chip in, Houda, if you don't mind. I mean, most of the models that I'm developing are for people that want to change something. Mm-hmm. And what I'd say in response to that question is I never present any done deal to anybody. I may do my own version because that's my prep, that's my homework, but I make damn sure that I involve the key stakeholders who are going to be making the decisions around the experiments, around the model. Because my bitter experience from many, many years ago is that unless you do that, you will not get commitment to change. It has to be theirs, not mine.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kerry.
Anyone else care to chime in? This is not supposed to be a spectator sport.
It's okay if nobody has to. Don't have to. Oh, Ian, you're on mute. Ian, you're on mute, my dear.
I'm muting because my voice is nearly going, but I'll try to keep going. a thought for me is that often with a model, the important thing is to sort of work with people to work with change and to say, well, what if we were to do something different in this model? And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind all the time, that people are asking questions, they have got problems, and the idea of the model is there to sort of give a framework for that questioning around what would happen if we were to do something differently. And that's, I think, the value of it. And my experience of using models is that they're never complete, and they're all very messy. But it's the process of getting people to engage with that thinking about changing things that seem the most important aspect of it all. Very few models have I then gone back to and made look really pretty and great and put somewhere else, because it doesn't happen like that, really. We just move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Super helpful.
So I also got tired of trying to convince people that they should develop a model. And I got to a point where I would sit down with someone and have them talk to me about what it was that they were wrestling with. And as they were talking, I'd ask them if it's okay if I take some notes. Though the notes that I start developing look like a model, but I never mention it. And as they continue to tell me things, I'm connecting pieces, and then I begin to ask them questions that arise from looking at the connections of the pieces. And it's really amazing that after 15 or 20 minutes, that person is looking at my notes and saying, you know, we ought to add this piece over here and connect it to this. And this actually influences this over here. And we've never talked about doing modeling. I call it the stealth approach to modeling, so that you accomplish the end of them having a better realization of the myriad of connections beyond cause and effect, without actually asking them to do something that they probably don't know how to do. If you go to somebody and say, we have to develop a model, and it's not, they haven't been drinking the Kool-Aid for a long time already, then it's probably something that they're not interested in doing. How's your tooth, JR?
Well, I'll see. Not good right now. I have a major toothache, and I see the dentist in 15 minutes. If I understand you, Gene, I am I'm coaching startups. I believe that every startup should have a correct model of what they're dealing with. That's what I believe. So if I correctly understand you, I could engage in a conversation with that startup and answering all those questions exactly the way you describe it, they would start to model the ecosystem or the problem they are dealing with, and then being able to build a better solution for that. Is that correctly understood?
I think so. It sounds what I think I was talking about.
Okay. Okay, so that's what I have in mind at this point of time, is to use what you said, what I said, which seemed to be the same for every of the startups I need to advise, to consult, blah, 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 to ask them, hey guys, problem, blah, 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 and then start a model and get from them to continue the model so that they can develop non-linear approach, a better solution with a higher impact based on a clearer understanding of what is they're solving.
Right. Mhm.
Okay. I go back to my
So, so I have to admit that I'm extremely biased toward Kumu. I started using it about a year before it was actually released. I have been testing it for 8 or 9 years now. It is the only piece of software that I have been able to find that allows me to do storytelling in a meaningful way. Well, actually 2 or 3 different meaningful ways. And so I promote it because once you understand how to use it, it's as fluid as a pencil and paper, but it has a better eraser. Right? It was specifically designed to do causal loop diagrams and other kinds of relationship maps that they added afterwards. And they're about to start the complete rebuild of version 3 from the ground up, which they tell me I can start testing in a month or 2.
Why are they changing it again? Didn't you say they already put like so many bells and whistles? What's the rationale of changing it?
Well, imagine building a house of cards. After you add so many things to it, it begins to get unstable. Every time you add something, you break something else, because it's had numerous developers over the years, and they have just added things into it that weren't planned at the beginning, and it just becomes, the software becomes a disaster. And I expect that getting to a complete rebuild will be a nightmare for the developers and the testers, though what comes out of it the other side will probably be far better than what's there now.
Well, if they want some people to test the new version, well, we can do it. I'm happy to do it. But we're going to use it anyway, right? As it is, we're going to have a go at modeling something.
Yes. So if we are finished with the review, I'd like to take one of these topics and go and move forward to go through the steps so that people can see what I've thought about how to go through the steps in the least inconvenient way possible.
Yeah, please do. Does anyone have a burning desire to start with a particular topic? Because Gene and I were trying to decide which one to start with, and we thought, actually, it doesn't matter. We just start with whatever people are most interested in. So if you really want to start with something, now is your chance. You can put it in the chat, maybe. If you don't want to speak up, you can just put it in the chat. Unless you already had some voting, Gene?
Well, why don't we, Kerry's here, why don't we do housing crisis or exam success? We would do incubator accelerator, but JR is going to leave shortly.
Okay.
You want to vote, Kerry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just had to pop away because somebody came to the door. So, what are we doing? We're voting on something.
Yeah. Do we want to do
Which one we
housing
start?
crisis or exam success?
Well, I think Denny Sherwood is here because of exam success. So I'd like to do that.
Okay. All right. So the idea is that if somebody comes to this particular map, each one of these topics has a discussion of, or a description of what it's about, and it has its own associated discussion that people can ask questions to, though once an actual project is started for it, it has to have a link to that particular project. So a person can get there from here. So if we're going to do exam success, we go to this blank and we tell it that we want to fork this project. So it now,
this is moving
Go
too
ahead.
quickly.
all right, go ahead.
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't. Can you do it more slowly, step by
Well,
step?
if
Because, you know,
up here, there are 3 parallel lines next to the title.
Actually,
I can't
Can
go
I-
back because I already clicked it. But if you click the 3 parallel lines, it pops up this dialog box. And down on this
okay,
dialog,
'cause-
it says fork this project, which takes whatever project you're looking at and it creates a version of that project that belongs to you. And it will put it in your workspace. So notice that the URL for this project is kumu.io/stw, which is my pro workspace.
okay.
It created this fork in Systems Wiki, which is my basic workspace. So when I now click on that, this is a new blank version of this project. But the difference between the basic and the pro workspace are a couple of things that are talked about in the previous video. And one of them that's critical to this is the ability to do discussions. Kumu only allows discussions. Yes, Dennis.
I don't want to interrupt. Before we, converge on exams, it was very generous of Kerry to mention that in my name. I think, given a community of people, there are 2 things that are relevant. One is interest in, the other is knowledge of. And it's not clear to me that both of those work for exams in England, whereas things like the economy or the housing crisis are probably much more significant problems in a social sense, and probably the knowledge base is higher and more evenly spread across the group. So I don't want us all to go down one particular route, if in fact there are better ones. And I guess I'm hinting that there are better ones by virtue of that combination of knowledge and interest. I don't know, but I just wanted to flag that before we
So,
get too far.
Kerry, suppose we do housing crisis then.
Yeah, I don't mind, or even something really, really simple, because if the objective of this is to learn about Kumu, then maybe we ought to pick something like, I don't know, making a good cup of tea. I mean, something that's really, really simple. Depends on our objective, really. Is our objective to learn about Kumu, or what are we here to do?
Well, I think the objective is learning about Kumu and actually developing a set of relationships. I'm following. Somebody needs to tell me where to go. Besides my wife.
Because I guess we've got people here that this might be their first time at drawing a causal loop diagram as well, or I don't know, because I don't know the experience of the other people.
It doesn't matter, Kerry. It really doesn't. Okay. So let's do housing crisis then. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Fine with me.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Fine with me.
All right. So we've created this new blank model by cloning the blank template. So we can get rid of this. We don't need this anymore. so now that we've done that, we actually need to tell it, we need to go to admin, and we need to rename this project, and we need to call it housing housing crisis. So notice that it's now changed the URL up here to housing crisis, but it's still in my basic workspace, and I want it in my pro workspace. So I need to transfer it to systems work. If you don't have two workspaces, you won't need to worry about this. Note that Kumu models, the URL to access a model is right here, and it's STW and the name of the model itself. Though I have a habit of realizing downstream someplace that I named the model wrong and I changed the name of it, which means it breaks this link. Kumu has this magic thing here called a permalink, which if you look down at the bottom of the screen, it shows the internal Kumu ID for this model, which will never change. So whenever I send somebody a link to a project, I always send them a permalink as opposed to the URL that's up here. So now that I've done this, I'm sitting in this workspace wherein I can only create three things. I can create an element, a connection, or a loop. But there's two modes of operation in Kumu. There's the standard mode, and then there's the sketch mode. And and when you look at this particular project, there's a video here on sketch mode. I didn't pay any attention to sketch mode for a long time, which was really stupid on my part, because that's the part that makes Kumu as fluid as a pencil and paper. But you have to get into sketch mode by going down here and saying sketch, which puts you in sketch mode and gives you a note down here that you're in sketch mode. So what it does is it sets it up to operate in a mode whereby if you click, it creates an element wherever you clicked. And if you want to create another element, what is it that the housing crisis has a major influence on? Something. Anyone? All right. What's that? You propose? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking like people's ability to actually own a house, or people's ability to own a house.
Okay. Own a house from what perspective? Because they can't afford it, or because it's not available, or?
Both.
Okay.
So affordability of housing and availability of housing.
Okay, so if I point over this and click and drag up here, sorry, I got to click in the right place. All right. It's that easy to, all right, come on, what am I doing? Stop.
I always have this theory that when you try to demo technology, it doesn't work. That's what we say in the agency world. Don't try to demo technology, it doesn't work.
Something is not working, which is right, which is really terrible. Because it's supposed to, when I do this, all right. Oh, now it works. All right. Weird. All right. So, all right. The question is, we always look at the relationship from one direction. If this increases, what happens to this? So if the housing crisis increases, the housing availability increases or decreases?
It's
decreases?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you can select this element or this connection, and you can change the type of it to say it adds to or subtracts from. All right, over here. That's the typical way of doing that, though there's part of what works best in sketch mode is there's a built-in toolbar so that if you mouse over this, the pencil pops up. So you can go over here and simply select and say it subtracts from, to say that as this increases, this decreases. And the other comment was that as the housing crisis increases, the housing prices increase. Was that the comment?
Actually, I was just thinking, I read Kerry's description quite a while ago when she put it last week, and now I can't actually remember. So I feel like we skipped the step of actually describing, like defining what we mean by housing crisis, because I have the feeling that I'm remembering it wrong. Like now I'm thinking of it as housing crisis as in, can we just, what did Kerry say? House prices are incredibly high in the UK and are being driven higher by second and multiple homeowners. Young locals cannot afford to stay and work in their locality unless they stay in this family home. So Kerry's kind of put a few things in there already that we could copy from. Where did that come from, Kerry? Is this a project that you worked on, or where did this interest, or why did you think of housing crisis in particular?
Because it underpins so many things. If you're homeless, it drives a whole range of other things that become very, very difficult to get out of. If you haven't got an address, you're not only vulnerable on the streets, but without an address, you can't get access to funding, you can't get a job. There's all sorts of things that happen as a result of becoming homeless. And actually, since then, somebody else who I just happened to have met in a different meeting shared with me something else that I could put into here if I knew how to do it, which is a diagram created by a group of homeless people about how they got into that situation. It's not a causal loop diagram. Exactly.
Is that John's one? I'm so annoyed I missed that meeting. Yeah, it sounded really good.
So it's not a causal loop diagram, it's just a set of entities. But those entities could be variabilized and put into a causal loop diagram. So, you know, I'd be happy to, if I knew, I can send it to Gene and Gene could maybe load it up into here.
I think I'm going to ask John to come and show us how he did, because I missed that meeting and I was half sorry because I was having a very good time in a spa, but I think I will invite him to come and show us that method again because it looked really interesting. And I wonder if those perspectives from the people that drew the diagrams is something, like you said, like how would you represent it onto here?
So
because I'm not homeless, well, suppose technically I don't own a house at the moment, so but I do have a roof over my head. And it's looking at that. That was the point about the housing crisis.
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to, do you have a link to what you want, or do you want to send it to me in an email, or?
Yeah, I can find it now and send it to you right away.
Okay.
Hold on, let me find
Okay.
it and forward it to you.
I have it as well in my email if you need me to dig it out, Kerry.
All right, so based upon that description, is this still the relationship that you want as part of this?
Well, I think maybe it's the housing availability comes first then, because the crisis is basically people not being able to, not having homes, right? Not being able to own their homes or being able to afford their homes. So actually housing availability, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just so the housing availability affects housing crisis as opposed to the other way around. And then it would still be.
So the availability of houses, as it increases, it decreases the crisis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this part was okay.
Yeah.
Right?
It was just the other way.
Okay. So what we're saying is, so the part, all right, the part that I find happens more often than not is people end up putting items on the map and they don't describe the items and they don't describe the relationships.
Yeah,
and
it's quite hard to do.
I have come to believe that the relationships are more important than the descriptions of the entities themselves, because if you read the description of the relationship, you understand what aspect of the source and destination that they're talking about. So how do I describe this relationship?
So it could be something like the lack of adequate housing. It decreases the ability of people to have their own homes, and so it increases the crisis. Like, you know, this makes it worse, makes housing crisis worse.
The lack of adequate housing decreases
the ability of people to own, or to, I mean, it's not just owning, I think it's also kind of like being able to even rent them.
Okay. Now, the thing is, what's important to understand about Kumu is this toolbar and the popover feature are mutually exclusive. So that this is in edit view. If we go back to default view, now when we mouse over these things, stop. Oh, I'm in sketch mode. These descriptions pop up to describe what the notes are that are actually attached to the entities. Here. Oh. Okay, hold on a second.
So actually, I think, like, even if we just draw what Kerry's written, because Kerry's described quite a few dynamics already in her description. This doesn't seem to happen. So like, Gene, if we were using the causal loop diagram app, probably if we'd put this as a prompt, it would already have drawn it. Do you think?
Wait a minute.
Did you play with that console loop diagram app, Kerry, that Gene was testing a few weeks ago?
No, I wasn't selected to be somebody to play with
Oh.
it.
So, all right.
Is that John's diagram? That's John's diagram.
Yeah.
And it's a little too small to see, but if you click on it, you can blow it up so you can look at it. Right. So, based upon where we are at the moment, what do we now add to this model? Availability, increase in availability decreases the housing crisis. What is it that influences housing availability?
Construction costs, for example.
As
And I
construction
guess
costs
based on
increase. Go ahead, Carl.
Yes, yes. Construction costs increase, affects less houses being built, right? So
Right. So as construction costs increase, housing availability decreases, which should therefore increase the housing crisis. Okay.
I think so. And I think Kerry had a bunch of factors as well, right? Like the second homes and holiday homes and rental properties.
Yeah. For me, I think that, I'm remembering my very original training with Barry Richmond here, where, he talked a lot about milk production, what affects milk production, and people listing all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And I always remember him saying to me, there's only two things that affect milk production: the number of cows and how much milk each cow produces. And he said, you have to get into milk and cows thinking. So here, for me, housing availability in that sense is affected by the housing stock and the number that are occupied. And everything else comes after that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I love that milking analogy.
Yeah, it really, these sorts of things really stick with you, and he certainly said a lot of things that have stuck with me since 1987.
Lucky you. Lucky
Yeah.
you.
Well, that's down to Dennis. I was in Dennis's group.
Ah.
Anyone else? Additions? But see, the idea is that each of the participants has a thought on the relationships. So you surface them and we talk about them and we decide which ones to add and which ones not to add. And sometimes you decide that, well, this is in here, but it really shouldn't be in there. So you take it out, but you don't delete it. You stick it down here in the corner, because repeatedly you find that when you take things out of the model, sooner or later, somebody's going to say, well, did you consider? Well, if you take it and you put it down in the corner and put a note on it as to why you took it out, when somebody asks about it later, you don't have to try and remember why you took it out because you have a note on it. about why you took it out.
Mhm.
So housing crisis. What does the housing crisis then influence?
Well, I guess like we were mentioning earlier, that people's ability to to have like a stable address, so people's ability to get jobs, people's ability to get loans so they can buy property, then they can't buy because they can't get loans and they get stuck in that.
Okay, so the housing crisis influences homelessness?
For example, here in Spain is very critical, the housing crisis, because of several factors like, the poor public promotion. I mean, because it's not only private, it's also the public promotion and the policy to promote that housing. And yeah, Houda, me too. And at the end, this lack of this housing crisis is creating critical outcomes, very bad outcomes on the young generations. They are not living their parents' houses until they reach 30, 35. Because prices are absolutely. For example, these things, these kind of outcomes affecting to the young generations.
Okay. Okay. That what you wanted, Miguel?
Well, at the end, these young generations living at home are is a poor, personal development is creating psychological effects and it's a
maybe
kind of
they leave it later to start families as well. I mean, that happens in Algeria for a long time. We had a housing crisis and people just stayed with their parents, and then people started to get married much later in life and to have children much later in life. I don't know if that happens in Spain, or people just get married and live in their parents' homes.
Oh, and that's why the population is decreasing. The
Mm.
birth rate is getting lower and lower. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm going to need to go. We're actually out of time, but please do feel free to continue. But I'm gonna have to go in 2 minutes to pick up the children.
Well, okay. I can stay for a few more minutes, but I'm going to have to run also. The question is, at this point, does this process make any sense? Should we continue to have this
Mhm,
meetings, or
yeah.
should I go do something else?
I think it's good to continue, but what I would suggest is, like for me, for example, thinking about the housing crisis is not something that I usually think about, even though it's a really valid topic. And any of the other topics, my knowledge of them is quite superficial. So I think for me, from my perspective, maybe we can send some kind of prompt or some kind of something for people to kind of think about it in advance, so that we can have, like more information, or I just feel like I'm out of my depth, for example, with this topic, but I do want to go through the process, and none of us can be experts at everything. So that would be my suggestion, is maybe to have some pre-read or a video or a documentary. You have you shared lots of great ones with me before, Gene. So maybe we do that before the next session, so we all kind of have thought about it. What does everyone think? Do you think that could be a good way to try? Yeah,
Actually,
maybe let's. Yeah, sorry.
I think that reflects very much that convergence of interest and knowledge. It's really very hard to, I think, understand something that you really don't know about, and even if you know about it, but you're not interested in it, it's not a lot of fun. I think if everyone that is assembling has a fundamental curiosity, but I agree with you that it's helpful to be reasonably well briefed, and to have some pre-thought. I must admit, just one thought on what we're doing now. I'm in a very, very kind of different space, as a by the by. I've been scribbling, and my diagram is very different. It's only got 5 variables on it to start with. One says demand for housing. The other one says supply of housing. They come together as either satisfied demand, i.e. it works, but if you've got a greater demand than you've satisfied, you've got excess demand. And if you've got a greater supply than you've got satisfied, you've got excess supply. Now, that works for any stratum. That works for first-time buyers, it works for rental. So you've got a stack of those, all of which aggregate to the total. But it strikes me that the housing crisis is less of a variable on the diagram, but the outcome of all of that, when you've got excess demand above a threshold which is causing social pain. So I was just experimenting in a rather different way and thinking, what is it that actually drives the demand? It's like the population, it's like family size, etc., etc. What drives the supply? The availability of land, the price, the cost of construction, government policy on planning. And then you can start seeing how does supply and demand in any given segment evolve over time? How do the segments move so that housing stock, which is potentially available, is priced too high for first-time buyers? And then the housing crisis is the result of all of that when it actually fails to meet various social criteria. Just a thought.
Well,
Dennis, I think sorry, I agree, Dennis, because I was thinking just the same thing, that all of the parts as we're starting to placing it on the board are measurable in some ways. Construction cost, housing availability, all of that stuff, but housing crisis, I mean, we haven't defined it, I guess, in a way that will be measurable. So it feels like the housing crisis is it's actually the name of the dynamics that we're trying to map that reflects in a certain factors being impacted, and it's crisis. That crisis looks different for different types of population or stakeholders that are being affected by it on the map.
Yeah.
So Dennis, all of the things that you talked about are relevant, but we didn't capture any of them. Okay. So and my point is that when we do this, we need to capture things so that people can reflect on them later, as opposed to them just drifting away. All right, because I expect that few people are going to spend an hour to watch this video all the way to the end. to capture your thoughts,
Yeah,
right?
sure, yeah.
So
But it's
the
good. I
idea,
think it's definitely, and I think that is one of the things, right, Gene, that we wanted, is that each one of us will think differently, and each one of us will approach the question from a different perspective. But I think, like you mentioned, Dennis, if we don't have enough knowledge of it, or if it's something we haven't thought about, then it's a little bit harder to articulate it. But I think it's really interesting, kind of starting the way we started or the way you thought about it. And, you know, there's benefits to both ways. So it's really great. Thank you
Sure.
to both of you.
so the other part that I didn't mention is the idea is that for each topic, there are 3 to 5 people that are really interested in that topic, and those are the people that participate in the mapping. It's not that the entire group of people is engaged in every one of the maps because they're not interested in them.
It's fine. I mean, this was the first one, so you know, this was just really kind of getting to grips with the tool and kind of figuring out. So it's fine.
Okay.
I'm not worried about that. And it's also the first time that we work together like this. So for me, it's absolutely fine. There's no issue whatsoever. I think it's great.
Okay.
I think we should give it another go. We should give it another go, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. So nice to meet you, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks, Carl and Miguel and Laurie.
Nice to meet
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks,
My
Ian.
pleasure.
Bye. Talk to you
Thank you.
soon. Bye.